All right, we are live right here on X, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Rumble. It is good to see you all. Happy Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day to the men and women who served in the or currently serve in the United States Armed Forces. You know, one of my favorite things about Veterans Day is how cute y'all are when we wish you happy Veterans Day. This is an experience I have every year on Veterans Day. I see somebody who I know served and I say thank you for your service because I appreciate the fact that you were willing to sign on the dotted line, willing to not just work for the military, but willing to say, I will give my life for our country if need be. And I like to thank you on Veterans Day. And it's so cute because you guys get so embarrassed by that. You're always like, thank you, ma'am. That's really cute. And I appreciate that about you. What do they say in the military? That the greatest part of valor is discretion. And I feel like that's a little bit of a lost art in our society at large today, but it still exists in the military community. I know there are a lot of military veterans that are with us sitting here today on the Liz Wheeler Show, today and every day. And so I just want to say, I don't care right now if you're blushing or if you're clearing your throat because it makes you uncomfortable. Thank you. I sincerely appreciate you, and so does everybody else associated with the Liz Wheeler Show. There's a video that I want to show you associated with Veterans Day before we move on to talking about our topics of the day. And we have some extremely good topics today. But there's a video that I saw related to Veterans Day. It actually is not a U.S. military veteran. It's a British World War II veteran. So think about the age of this guy. World War II veterans are like 100 years old now. And this World War II veteran in Britain during British Remembrance Day, which is similar to U.S. Veterans Day. It's actually more similar to U.S. Memorial Day. But it's in early November, just like Veterans Day is here in the United States. This World War II veteran in Britain went on British TV to talk about his service and sacrifice and to participate in a memorial. And he said something that just floored me. He said something that rendered me speechless about how his country, and I think this applies to the United States too, that's why I want to show it to you, how his country has changed since he and his brothers in arms sacrificed so much for Western civilization. Take a look at this.
What does Remembrance Sunday mean for you? What is your message?
My message is I can see in my mind's eye those rows and rows of white stones of all the hundreds of my friends and everybody else that gave their lives for what? The country of today. No, I'm sorry. The sacrifice wasn't worth the result that it is now.
Oh, well, I'm sorry.
What do you mean by that, though? At this point?
What we fought for, and what we fought for was our freedom. We find that even now it's darn sight worse than what it was when I fought for it.
Oh, Alec, I'm sorry.
Well, first of all, I have no idea who the news anchor is, that woman. But the mainstream media seems to be consistent, whether it's in the United States or in Britain, because it seems to be she can't wait to get past what he's saying. She's not interested in what he means or why he says this or why he feels that the sacrifice of hundreds of his friends dying in World War II, dying for freedom that he doesn't feel exists in modern Britain, it's uncomfortable for her. She wants to move on. But it's kind of chilling, isn't it? It's kind of chilling to think about the fact that all these young men, and again, this is true not just for the British, but this is true here in the United States. All these young men fought and died for freedom, for our liberty, for our constitutional rights. And are we, the subsequent generations, acting as good stewards of that freedom? Are we respecting and honoring that sacrifice with not just thanking veterans for their service, not just sort of, I don't want to call it trite because my thanks are sincere, but these surface level gratitude that we articulate, but through our actions, are we actually honoring this sacrifice or have we thrown it away? It seems like a question that laid heavy on my heart after I saw this video, because that's not just true. Britain is seeing this incredible crackdown in free speech. The Islamification of Britain is inarguable at this point, and we are just steps behind here in the United States if we do not course correct. It's a heavy topic for Veterans Day, but it's what's on my mind. Guys, thank you so much to all of you who've been subscribing to the Liz Wheeler Show. The show's been growing by leaps and bounds, and I appreciate each and every one of you. If you could take a moment to pick up your phone, go to the Spotify app, search The Liz Wheeler Show, hit subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate it. It helps other people find the show. So when you do that, you're not just, it's not just validating to me. It's not just something I'm grateful for. You're actually helping spread the word, and new people are joining every day because of you. So subscribe on Spotify if you could. All right. Yesterday, I said at the end of the show, there's a new report out on Jeffrey Epstein that's incredibly validating to some of the theories that you and I have discussed here on the show. And this new report is pretty much overlooked. I've seen almost nobody talking about this, but it's quite significant. So we are going to break down exactly what this report contains and the implications of this report. It of course is a report regarding Jeffrey Epstein's association with certain intel agencies around the world. That is what I will tell you. We'll get to that shortly in the show. Before we get to that, however, there were 4 women arrested last night in California. 4 women arrested for hanging a giant bug. Yes, you heard me correctly, a bug, like an insect, a cardboard cutout of an insect. These 4 women were arrested for hanging this cardboard bug at a Turning Point USA event at UC Berkeley. Now, you might be wondering the same thing I was wondering. Why were they hanging a giant bug? What is the symbolism of the bug itself? You can see the picture of it on the screen. Why were they arrested for hanging this? This is not something you just do. It must mean something. What does this bug mean? Well, we're going to break down the answer to that question, because it's pretty symbolically significant. All that and more today on The Liz Wheeler Show. This episode is sponsored by All Family Pharmacy. Listen, the holidays are a time for family, travel, and celebration, but they're also when everyone seems to be getting sick. Between crowded airports, don't you just hate the coughing in airports this time of year? Cold weather and all the running around, no one wants to spend Christmas week waiting in a clinic or a pharmacy line. That's why now is the perfect time to get your medicine cabinet ready. Be prepared so you can avoid the stress, the delays, and the last-minute doctor visits. All Family Pharmacy is a family-owned pharmacy that actually respects your time and your medical freedom, which is why I love them. There's no insurance hassle, no waiting rooms, no pharmacy lines. Everything is done safely online. You just select the medication that you want, that works for you. Your order is reviewed by a licensed doctor who writes you a prescription for that medication. Then it is shipped straight to your door within just a few days. That's it. That is how easy it is. All Family Pharmacy offers more than 300 trusted medications, antibiotics, antivirals, antiparasitic options like, ivermectin, plus complete flu and sinus kits for when sickness hits you and your family fast. Visit allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz to order today. You can use my promo code Liz10 and you get 10% off your order. Get what you need before the holiday rush starts. It's one less thing to worry about this season. Always consult a licensed healthcare provider before using any medication. That's allfamilypharmacy.com/Liz, promo code Liz10. All right. Listen, I'm sorry that it's gotten to this point. I said this on the show yesterday. My bar is extremely high when it comes to people on our side of the aisle, people that I consider to be like-minded. I'm extremely generous with people that I consider to be political allies. And my definition of a political ally is, do I agree with you on more things than I disagree with you on? That's essentially it. If we're on the same side on more political issues than we disagree, then okay, we are actually a movement is how I would describe it. And we are working towards the same goal, which means it's probably advantageous to work arm in arm. And that's what I consider to be someone on my own side. And my bar is extremely high for these people. I generally don't care about the disagreements if we are working towards the same goal politically. That's what a movement means. We're not like the left where you have to have this ideologically identical views, or else, you fail the purity test and you get ostracized from the party. Listen, no, that's not me. I give the benefit of the doubt pretty generously to people on our side. And I said this about Candace Owens yesterday on the show. I said the same thing for months on end about Attorney General Pam Bondi after the whole Epstein binders debacle. Listen, I gave her the benefit of the doubt and was pretty generous with Pam Bondi for months on end before I said, you know what? She's become a liability for President Trump and she should either resign or President Trump should ask for her resignation. I didn't say that for, I think, 3 months after the Epstein binders debacle, even though I thought that the day it happened. You're generous with people on your own side because we all share a goal. We want to be successful. We want the Trump administration to be successful. And so you're generous with people on your own side. to a point. But look at what happened last night. At UC Berkeley, Turning Point USA hosted an event featuring Rob Schneider and Frank Turek. And outside of this event on the campus of UC Berkeley, a college ostensibly founded on the principles of free speech, Antifa turned out en masse. A mob of Antifa Black Bloc militants attempted to disrupt the TPUSA event, including, and I apologize in advance for the profanity and vulgarity that you are about to hear when I show you this video, absolutely disgusting chants of F your dead homie. Do you know what that means? That means that Antifa militants, who have been designated as domestic terrorists by President Trump, by the way, were not only celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk, they were doing so publicly. They were throwing it in the face of every person who attended the Turning Point USA. Take a look at this. This went on, by the way, for hours. You can see an aerial view of the protest, because of course this wasn't just verbally obnoxious and offensive and harassment. It was violent. The protesters immediately turned violent. One of the Antifa protesters ripped off the necklace of a TPUSA supporter and then ran away with it. You can watch this unfold here. This is an aerial view of exactly what's happening. You see the Antifa militant approach the Turning Point USA supporter, rip off the necklace. And of course, what happens next is a fight ensues because the Turning Point USA supporter defends himself, as is his right to do. He chases down the Antifa thug who assaulted him, and you can see that they begin to engage in a fight because the Antifa militant is violent. He not only initiated the assault, when the Turning Point USA supporter began to defend himself, he assaulted the Turning Point USA supporter even further. Now, you might be wondering what happened in the wake of that altercation. Well, what happened in the wake of this altercation is the Turning Point USA student, this Turning Point USA supporter, was arrested. Yes, the victim of the Antifa assault, the man in the red shirt, was the one arrested. This is an up-close video of police pulling these two individuals apart, the student who was assaulted and defending himself and the Antifa militant. Both men were arrested. Why was that? Why were both people arrested? We'll get to the answer to that in just a second, but for full context of what happened here, you can see the bloodied nose of this individual. You can see the blood dripping from his face. He was violently assaulted by this Antifa militant. The other protesters at this event set off flares outside of the venue. They drove cars, screeching tires, intentionally causing backfiring noises that were intended to sound similar to gunshots in order to frighten the attendees of this event. You can see the black smoke, the flares that were set off. How would you feel if you heard that sound 2 months? 2 months and 1 day after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. They knew what they were doing. They were deliberately inciting fright. They were harassing people who were attending an event. They also breached police barricades. Now, they're not very strong, some of these people, and you can make fun of them for that. You can mock them. They show up in their masks to hide their identities. But you can see that they intentionally push against these orange police barricades. The police have to push back on them. They, of course, call everyone associated with the Turning Point USA event. They call them Nazis and fascists. They're deliberately antagonizing police. Then when an individual does breach the barrier, you can see that Antifa militant kicked it over. They are assaulting law and order. And so here's my question today. Here's my question. And this is why I said at the beginning, I'm sorry that it's gotten to this point. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Where are all the arrests? I'm sorry. Let me clarify that. There were some arrests. The victim, the conservative who defended himself after being assaulted by the Antifa thug, he was arrested. He was arrested. The 4 women who hung that giant bug that I showed you a minute ago, those women were arrested. The guy who ripped the necklace off the conservative, he was also arrested, waiting to see what charges he faces. And there were 1 or 2 arrests for those who pushed against that police barricade. There was a total of maybe 7 arrests, 1 of whom was the conservative, 4 of whom were the women who were carrying this gigantic bug, this grasshopper, whatever it's supposed to be. So there were some arrests. There were more arrests, if you want to do the math, for hanging a cardboard bug than for the entire violent, chaotic scene where they were lighting flares and breaching police barricades and shouting, fascists are at Berkeley, fascists are at Berkeley, and F your dead homie. How is this possible? Literally, how is this possible? This bug is critical to understanding, to answering that question. What does this bug mean? Why would you bring a giant bug to a protest? Why would you try to hang a giant bug? You know, normal people hang like American flags or like Christmas wreaths. Why would you bring a giant bug? You bring that bug because it's a symbol of something. It's intended to convey a message, a visual message. You want people to think a certain thing when they see this representation of whatever you're trying to represent. So what is it that these 4 women were trying to represent? Well, they were trying to represent their belief that conservatives are an infestation, that conservatives, those who attend a Turning Point USA event, are pests. They're no better than insects. They're bugs that need to be exterminated. Their belief, these women who tried to hang this gigantic cardboard grasshopper, this bug at UC Berkeley, they are conveying that they think you are nothing more than a disgusting insect worthy of pest extermination. That is what they are saying. So yeah, it's a good thing that they're arrested. It's the right and proper thing. Now, of course, the charge is just not trespassing. It's the charges is minor. The charge is very minor here. It's felony vandalism. Felony vandalism is the charge here. But here's what I would propose to you today. The man who yelled at Dave Portnoy, he yelled like F the Jews or something offensive. That man was arrested for yelling. He didn't assault Dave Portnoy. He didn't push back on, he didn't violate police barricades. He yelled something offensive at Dave Portnoy, and he was arrested for disturbing the peace. And that happened in the South. But in California, Antifa walks free. This is what I mean when I say I'm sorry that it's gotten to this point. What happened to President Trump designating Antifa as domestic terrorists? Those words sound wonderful. I was very relieved when I heard President Trump designate Antifa as domestic terrorists. I thought, good. Finally, we're going to actually see federal law enforcement dismantle this network of radical anti-American groups who use violence to try to harm you and overthrow the American government. That's what I felt the day that President Trump designated Antifa as domestic terrorists. But to this day, since then, to this day, the only terrorism charges brought against any Antifa members is charges for providing material support or resources to individuals. Cameron Arnold and Zachary Evitz were charged with these terror enhancements over the ICE shooting in Texas. That's it. What happened? In the days after Charlie Kirk's assassination, when Vice President J.D. Vance hosted Charlie's radio show from the White House campus, he had Stephen Miller on as one of his guests, and Stephen Miller describes his last communication with Charlie Kirk. Stephen Miller says, one of our last exchanges was Charlie Kirk expressing the urgency for the Trump administration to dismantle these radical leftist networks, because these aren't isolated incidents. These aren't just some one radicalized random crazy. This is a coordinated, funded effort to sow violence and harm conservatives. And Stephen Miller said that was the last conversation I had with Charlie Kirk before Charlie Kirk was killed by the very people that he described. And on that day, Stephen Miller said to Vice President J.D. Vance on Charlie Kirk's radio show, he said, "I will fight to dismantle these radical leftist networks for the rest of my life." What happened to that? Where is that? Listen, I get it. A lot of the onus lies on Berkeley police and on city police. They're charged with protecting the individuals, the conservatives on college campus. They're supposed to be the ones who are the front lines of maintaining law and order. And where were they? They weren't arresting very many people. They arrested the conservative and they arrested the women who hung the bug. But what about the people firing off the flares? What about the driver of the car that was backfiring, intentionally frightening a crowd, deliberately making people think that there were shots being fired? What about the people yelling, "F your homie," and "fascists are here at Berkeley"? What about all of the disruptions, no matter how small? Like, you step on a piece of grass that you're not supposed to step on. If you're Antifa Black Bloc, you should be arrested. The Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the Justice Department, that's Harmeet Dillon. We love her on this show. She's wonderful. She was wonderful as a civilian attorney. She's wonderful in government. She posted this. She said, "We saw all of this at Berkeley back in 2017. UC Berkeley was sued and settled the case. The Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice will investigate what happened here, and I see several issues of serious concern regarding campus and local security and Antifa's ability to operate with impunity in California." That's wonderful. I am so grateful to hear that from Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon. That is great. But here's the thing. It's not enough. It will never be enough if you are playing a game of whack-a-mole. It will never be enough if you are addressing this problem one person at a time only after the infraction or the violence has been committed. Antifa will continue to be emboldened. They will continue to commit violence until and unless there is a thorough dismantling from the top down. And I know Antifa likes to say that they don't have any organizational structure. They're a decentralized network. They're just an idea, they say. BS. This is also what the mafia said, by the way, decades ago. And just like with the mafia, unless you bring down the whole organization, 50, 100 arrests, not just one-offs when they get violent, it's not going to solve the problem. Remember 2 weeks ago when we had journalist Brandy Cruz on the show, and she's been covering Antifa in the Northwest for a decade now. She used to be a leftist, but when she started seeing how the mainstream media lied about, the Antifa autonomous zones in Portland, Oregon, she said, well, if the mainstream media is lying about the reality of what Antifa is actually doing, and Antifa physically assaulted Brandy Cruz, so she had personal experience with the reality of what Antifa is. She said, if the mainstream media and the left are lying about Antifa, what else are they lying about? And she realized the answer to that is everything. They lie about everything. And she's somewhat of an expert on Antifa because she's been embedded in the areas where Antifa is rampant for so many years. And she told us when she was on the show that the Antifa organizational structure, about 10% of the Antifa militants are committed violent revolutionaries. They are willing to kill and be killed for their cause, their communist cause. And that's scary. That's a frightening prospect. This means that we're dealing with a significant domestic enemy. But she also said that 90% of these Antifa thugs who turn out at these protests are cowards, that they would disappear if they believed that they would face any accountability for their behavior. And right now, they don't have any reason to believe that they will face any accountability for their behavior. So the question is, what can the Justice Department do about this? And again, I'm grateful for Harmeet Dillon looking at what happened on UC Berkeley and saying, I see problems here, and will address this. That's good. I'm happy to see Antifa violence addressed on a case-by-case basis. But if you actually want to solve the Antifa problem, then you need to break up the organization, and there's a playbook to do so. There's a playbook to do so. Back in September in the Oval Office, President Trump himself, this is not a novel idea that I'm presenting to you. This is something that's been discussed. The words have been said by the leaders of our country. We just have yet to see the actions following those words. Back in September in the Oval Office, President Trump himself said that the Department of Justice is looking at RICO charges for groups, left-wing, violent groups like Antifa. Take a look at this.
Antifa is terrible.
Are there other groups that you can pick up?
There are other groups, yeah, there are other groups. We have some pretty radical groups, and they got away with murder. And also, I've been speaking to the Attorney General about bringing RICO against some of the people that you've been reading about that have been putting up millions and millions of dollars for agitation. These aren't protests. These are crimes, what they're doing, where they're throwing bricks at cars of ICE and Border Patrol. And they come in with a beautiful new car. They're so proud. It's Border Patrol, ICE, it's got whatever it is. And they're throwing rocks at it. And after 50 yards, it looks like an old beat-up vehicle. It was just brand new. It was just bought for the purposes. And they don't have to take that anymore. I let it be known. We'll take responsibility. They don't have to take it anymore. And they don't want to take it. They were told by a past administration, it became almost a culture. If somebody throws a rock at you, do nothing. If somebody spits in your face, do nothing. And I say, when they spit, you hit. Do whatever you want. You do whatever the hell you want. I watched it so sick it made me. For 4 years, I had to sit home and watch people screaming at policemen and spitting in their face, and they weren't able to do anything. They just had a grin and bear it. They're standing up like a piece of steel. And a woman, in many cases, women, you can see they're professional agitators. I had one the other night. I had 4 the other night, all in one group, total phonies. I started to scream when I got into a restaurant, something with Palestine. And I said, well, I'm doing a great job for peace in the Middle East. I should get lots of awards for that, right? With the Abraham Accords and everything else. But a woman just stood up and started screaming. And she got booed out of the place, too. There were a lot of people in the restaurant. I went there to show how safe, and it was safe. I mean, the woman is just a mouthpiece. All she was a paid agitator. And you have a lot of them. And I've asked Pam to look into that in terms of RICO, bringing RICO cases against it, criminal RICO, because they should be put in jail. What they're doing to this country is really subversive.
So you hear these words, and I mean, you can see my reaction. You hear these words, and you're like, this man gets it. President Trump gets it. He has articulated exactly what's happening. He's articulated a plan, a viable, I don't want to call it an easy plan because none of this is easy, but the case is so cut and dry. It's so obvious that this would be a conviction case. And yet this was back in September. Where is this? There is no reason that foreign communist funded violence should be tolerated on U.S. soil. There is no excuse. No, they have a right to free speech. That doesn't apply to Antifa, because what Antifa is doing is not saying words. They're committing violence. You are not allowed, even under the First Amendment, to incite imminent violence. You are not allowed to assault police officers. You are not allowed to push down police barricades. You are not allowed to take money from, if you are designated a terrorist organization, as Antifa is, you're not allowed to take money from Chinese Communist Party affiliated actors like Roy Singham in order to foment violence on U.S. streets and on U.S. college campuses. You have no constitutionally protected right to do that. And yet Antifa hides behind this narrative that the mainstream media conveniently propagates for them, that they're decentralized network. They're just, how do you go after an organization that isn't really an organization? I'll tell you how. Let's go back to 1970 for a second. During the Nixon presidency, in the early 1970s, and even later into the 1970s and 80s, members of the mob, the mafia, used to say the exact same thing. They said, the mafia doesn't exist. The mob doesn't exist. It's a mythical group. It's a Hollywood fairy tale. It was just popularized by the Godfather movies. It's not a thing. What are you talking about? If this sounds familiar, it's because Antifa uses the exact same playbook. And so what Congress did in response to this, because We all knew that the mob was real, the mafia was real, an organized crime syndicate. What Congress did is they passed RICO. They passed RICO. RICO is a law that allows the federal government to go after organized criminal enterprises like the mob or like Antifa, even when they don't technically have a membership role. So, for example, before RICO was passed, the Department of Justice had a difficult time making any charges stick on the mob bosses because the mob bosses were very careful to keep a lot of layers of personnel between them and the foot soldiers who actually carried out the crimes so that there appeared to never be any direct ties between the boss and the crimes committed, even though he was the one giving the directions. So you're familiar with this. You know the mob. The hierarchical structure was like this. There was a boss at the top, then there was the underboss, then there was the capos, the captains between the underboss, and then the soldiers who worked for each capo. And beneath the soldiers were the associates who collaborated with members of the organization, provided even more distance, more deniability between the mob members and the criminal activities. And this made it really difficult for law enforcement to ever actually crack down on the organizational structure of the mafia. Once in a while, they'd catch someone committing the crime, but they could never catch the person who commissioned the crime until RICO. After RICO was passed, the government could prove that there were criminal organizations and they could charge anyone involved in the organization when anyone in the organization or associated with the organization committed a crime. Think about the 1980s, New York City under Rudy Giuliani. He used RICO to prosecute and take down the mafia. And what happened? Crime drastically reduced. RICO, by the way, for those asking, stands for the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. And RICO applies almost to a letter to Antifa because Antifa operates almost exactly like the mob did. There are several elements that need to be satisfied, behavioral elements that need to be satisfied before you can be charged with a RICO violation. You have to have the existence of an enterprise. That's just a group of people or entities associated together for a common purpose. And it doesn't have to be a formal structure. It doesn't have to be like a corporation or a union or anything. It can be informal, like a street gang or just loose associations of people. But there has to be a structure. There has to be a structure beyond just, people getting together committing crimes. Does Antifa satisfy that element? Well, of course they do. They're a group of individuals who share a common goal, who commit crimes together. Then the second element, the enterprise must affect interstate or foreign commerce, even minimally. Well, this is always satisfied because all you have to do is use a phone or like a bank or a highway or send mail or something, and that's interstate commerce. Okay, element one satisfied, element two satisfied. The defendant, the person being charged, the association, that defendant's association with the enterprise, that defendant must be employed by or associated with the enterprise, but it doesn't require formal membership. Just participation is enough. Also easy to satisfy. Think of these individuals who commit the crimes against the police officers. They're not doing that on their own. The fourth element, participation in the conduct of the enterprise's affairs. The defendant, in order to be charged, must participate in either the operation or the management of the enterprise. Now, outsiders can be liable if they direct any affairs, but you have to be part of this structure. But again, if you're thinking, wow, these are all extremely easy elements to meet, these standards, well, yes, it is, because all that you have to do is go to an Antifa safe house. You have to be part of the Antifa safe house. You are participating in the operation. You hand out flyers. You're participating in the operation. You take part in the chants. You're participating in the operation. And then, of course, the final element to satisfy a RICO charge is a pattern of racketeering activity. So what does that mean? That means that there has to be 2 acts of racketeering activity. They're called predicate acts within the past 10 years. This is anything from murder to kidnapping to gambling, arson, robbery, bribery, extortion. There are 35 predicate acts in total. Again, super easy to satisfy when it comes to Antifa because all they do is commit crimes. All they do is commit crimes. And there has to be some kind of continuity and relationship between the individual and the organization. And then the organization is, in fact, liable for the crimes committed by the individual when that individual is part of the decentralized network, that we aren't really a thing, we just operate as a thing. If we want to stop Antifa violence in our country, if we are actually tired of being called bugs and being assaulted, if we want to prevent the assassination of other conservatives for the crime of being conservative, then we can't play whack-a-mole. We can't simply be a reactive force, filing charges when there's violence that's already been committed. We have to undercut and dismantle the very organizations that plot this violence in our country. And the words that I hear from the Trump administration, they're great. I hear those words from Stephen Miller talking about how he is committed until his dying day of dismantling these organizations. And I say, thank you, Stephen Miller. We need someone like that. I hear President Trump and I think he understands this. But where are the actions that follow those words? I get it. Investigations take time. All of these elements have to be proven. My hope is that the investigators are currently hard at work right now, and they will, at some point in the near future, unveil a absolute solid case against Antifa. That's my hope. But here's what we need. In the absence of confirmation that what we hope is happening is actually happening, we need to hear something from our government. We need to hear directly from President Trump that they're not just speaking words, that these actions are taking place. Because we, as conservatives, as supporters in this shared America First mission with President Trump, we are sitting ducks. And the president knows this. The president's the one who took a bullet to the ear because of this shared America First vision. He is also targeted. We need President Trump's voice to tell us, to instill in us a confidence that our Justice Department sees Antifa as the threat to our way of life that they are. And that we're not just going to hear the words to pacify us, but we will soon see, following the words, justice served. And not as a game of whack-a-mole, but as a thorough dismantling of these networks, these interconnected, highly funded, anti-American, violent networks that want us dead. All right, yesterday's show ran a little longer than we'd planned, and we didn't get to the Jeffrey Epstein report. This new Jeffrey Epstein report, I'm surprised actually that this report has not gotten more traction than it has, but I've seen barely anybody talking about it. I think it's pretty significant given the theories about Jeffrey Epstein. Who was he working for? Was he working for American intel? Was he working for French intel? Was he working for Saudi intel? Was he working for Israeli intel? What did he actually do? Why did he get let off easy in that non-prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice? It kind of a slap on the wrist for horrific crimes against underage girls. Of course, the theory, and this isn't just somebody's wild theory, is Alex Acosta, who was the prosecuting attorney at the time, did an interview in 2020 with Attorney General Bill Barr, in which he said the reason he was told to back off of prosecuting Jeffrey Epstein was because Jeffrey Epstein belonged to intelligence. This is the root of all of our questions. And this new report on Jeffrey Epstein seems to give us some answers. I want to give a shout out to our second sponsor for today's show, Crowd Health. This time of year, insurance companies are hoping that you will sleepwalk into another cycle of overpriced premiums, network headaches, and endless fine print. It's open enrollment season where they're betting you won't question anything, but they don't know you. They don't know what we do here on the Liz Wheeler Show. We question everything because there's finally a better way. Crowd Health isn't insurance. I like to call it assurance. It's a community of people who've had enough of the old system and are taking healthcare into their own hands. You know that we have now reached the 1-year anniversary of when my husband and I quit our health insurance and joined Crowd Health. We said, we're not going to do it anymore. We're not going to pay these enormous premiums only to have unreachable deductibles. And when we do have a claim, to see that claim denied. We're not doing it anymore. For under $100 a month, you get access with Crowd Health to prescription discounts, lab testing tools, a network of quality doctors, and a team that negotiates medical bills on your behalf. And if something major does happen, and it does to everyone at some point in your life, well, you pay the first $500 and then the crowd steps in to help you with the rest. It's what healthcare used to feel like before it got hijacked by bureaucracy and bad policy. Before Obamacare, Crowd Health members have already saved over $40 million simply by refusing to overpay. You can too. This open enrollment, take your power back. Join Crowd Health to get started today for $99 for your first 3 months using code Liz at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com, promo code Liz. Joincrowdhealth.com, promo code Liz. Okay. The Jeffrey Epstein report substantiates really the theories that you and I have discussed on this show. So let's journey back. What is this, 2 or 3 months ago? We had Mike Benz on the show, and Mike Benz untangled, or he proposed this theory about Jeffrey Epstein. And as you know, there's about 1 billion theories about Jeffrey Epstein. But in my analysis of most of the theories about what Jeffrey Epstein did for a living, there's holes in every theory. It's like I'll start reading some theory. I'll be like, yes, yes, yes. Oh no. And there's just some thing about every theory that doesn't add up. There's maybe elements of truth in every theory, but there's just not one that like explains Jeffrey Epstein's existence. But Mike Benz provided for us a theory that I find to be the most plausible theory. It is maybe the one theory that doesn't have a very obvious hole in it. And I'm going to lay that out to you just very quickly before I read you this new report on Jeffrey Epstein. Mike Benz's theory on Jeffrey Epstein is that Epstein was not a formal employee of like the CIA or a US intel agency or the French or the Saudis or the Israelis, but that he served as an informal liaison for off-the-books deals that the US government or the French government or the UK government or the Israeli government wanted to happen, but it couldn't appear as if they were part of brokering that deal. The example that Mike Benz gave was Iran-Contra, right? When the US government, off the books, used a liaison to do an arms deal with the Iranians, even though Congress had passed a statute prohibiting that. Well, obviously, the Reagan administration could not make it appear that they were violating this law, so they used an off-the-records liaison to broker this deal to try to do it behind the scenes. Now, of course, you and I know that ultimately the Reagan administration was caught in the Iran-Contra deal, but that example is what Mike Benz has said. There is evidence that this was the type of role that Epstein played when it comes to his association with intel agencies. And I thought to myself, now this is very interesting because the theories that Jeffrey Epstein was running a honeypot operation, that his essentially pedophile activities were at the behest of a government intel agency, that seemed a little wild to me. And this is I'm saying this as someone who really doesn't put anything past government intel agencies. There was never enough evidence that Epstein was doing his pedophile activities at the behest of a government agency for me to believe that. But there is evidence. There is enough, at least circumstantial evidence, that Epstein was involved in brokering these deals on behalf, unofficially, of governments, that those governments might then overlook his criminal activities in his personal life, these crimes he committed against underage girls. That actually makes the most logical sense to me. We talked about that a couple months ago on the show. Well, fast forward to today. This report actually dropped a couple days ago, 4 or 5 days ago. It's from Drop Site News, and I want to read a little bit of what this article says. It says, Jeffrey Epstein helped Israel sell a surveillance state to Côte d'Ivoire. Leaked emails show the details behind talks between Côte d'Ivoire and Israel shepherded by Ehud Barak and Jeffrey Epstein. This is what the article reads. Jeffrey Epstein and Ehud Barak were specialists in war profiteering. At the end of his tenure as Israel's defense minister, and after his supposed retirement, Barak embraced a role as a salesman of Israeli security services to embattled governments, opening the door for Israeli intelligence leaders to shape the security apparatuses of several African nations, including the country of Côte d'Ivoire. Quietly facilitating these efforts was Jeffrey Epstein, who died in jail in 2019. Epstein wrote at one point to Barak, quote, with civil unrest exploding and the desperation of those in powers, isn't this perfect for you? Barak replied, you're right in a way, but not simple to transform it into a cash flow. Transforming unrest into cash flow in the case of Côte d'Ivoire involved brokering deals between the Israeli state and the embattled West African nation. Drop Site News continues and says new details about Epstein's role in Israeli intelligence operations in Africa have emerged from two sets of documents: an archive of leaked emails released by the Handala hacking group and hosted by nonprofit whistleblower site Distributed Denial of Secrets, and documents released by the U.S. House Oversight Committee last month. The latter set, the House Intel Committee, includes Epstein's personal emails and appointment calendars, which provide clear evidence of Epstein's involvement in Israel's West African security negotiations in 2012, while Barak was still Israel's defense minister. The two men worked together as a conduit for Israel's intelligence sector in Côte d'Ivoire, where Barak was welcomed as a representative of the Israeli government even after leaving public office. Epstein helped Barak deliver a proposal for mass surveillance of Ivorian phones and internet communications crafted by former Israeli intelligence officials. As in Mongolia, Epstein and Barak's private deal-making evolved seamlessly into an official security agreement between Israel and Côte d'Ivoire in 2014. Since the agreement was signed over a decade ago, President Alassane Ouattara has tightened his grip on power, banning public demonstrations and arresting peaceful protesters. In this October's election, the octogenarian won a fourth term in defiance of constitutional term limits, while opposition candidates were barred from participation. Today, Ouattara continues to enjoy the support of Israeli security firms to help him maintain power. His Israeli-backed police state has squashed civic organizations and silenced critics. In the wake of the recent elections, exiled activist Bogo Saka Gervais denounced Ouattara's authoritarian state, saying, under Ouattara, since 2011, freedoms of opinion, thought, and expression have been criminalized. He said it has become forbidden to criticize the head of state. Drop Site News says the story of Israel's security agreement with Côte d'Ivoire is only one chapter in the saga of Epstein and Barak's covert activities in Africa. It is reported here as the next entry in an ongoing series on Epstein's ties to Israel's intelligence. Now, I find that to be very interesting because it is not just a theory as presented by Mike Pence, who, by the way, came with receipts. He had evidence of other very wealthy financiers around the world who served, we know, as off-the-books liaisons for government deals. They wanted brokers, and Jeffrey Epstein was associated with them. Mike Pence's theory holds a lot of water, and it is significantly substantiated by this report. This is exactly what Mike Pence described. Jeffrey Epstein, not an employee of the CIA, not an employee of the UK intel apparatus, not necessarily an employee of Israeli intelligence, but brokering deals that benefited these nations, in particular Israel, brokering deals that the Israeli government wanted brokered, but couldn't necessarily do themselves at the beginning. I find that to be incredibly substantiating, and that could hold the key to that Alex Acosta interview. When Alex Acosta, he was the U.S. attorney at the time who was supposed to prosecute Jeffrey Epstein, and he, allowed Jeffrey Epstein to enter into a non-prosecution agreement that he shouldn't have allowed him to, given the crimes that Jeffrey Epstein committed against underage girls. When he was asked about this later by Attorney General Bill Barr, he said, I was told to back off because Epstein belonged to intelligence. The key word there is belonged. He wasn't an asset. He wasn't an agent. He wasn't an employee. He just belonged. He's someone we use. He's useful to us. But what if his use was to multiple intel agencies around the world? What if it wasn't just, we don't know. Alex Acosta was interviewed by the House Oversight Committee, I believe. The House Oversight Committee or the House Intel Committee interviewed Alex Acosta, but you and I have not seen any readout of that interview. We don't know what questions he was asked or what questions he wasn't asked. We still don't know. And Attorney General Pam Bondi does today, as she always has, she does hold the power to declassify and release the original interview that Alex Acosta did with Attorney General Bill Barr in 2020, where he said that Epstein belonged to intelligence. We don't know what else Bill Barr asked him. If Alex Acosta said which intelligence he was alleging Epstein to be associated with, whether it was ours or whether it was a foreign intel agency. We don't know what else Acosta was asked or what else he wasn't asked. He also didn't. We don't know if he said, I was told to back off. Yeah, by whom? Is it someone within the U.S. government? Was it a lobbying group? Was it a foreign government? Who told you to back off? We don't know the answers to those questions, and we don't know the readout We don't know of these questions, which were asked by the congressional investigators when Alex Acosta testified behind closed doors. We don't know the answers to that, but it's getting to a point where I suspect I know the answers to that. I suspect as we are seeing these reports continue to unfold and they are validating and substantiating Mike Penz's theory here, you can see why a government intel agency would not want Jeffrey Epstein to be rendered useless to them. You can see why a foreign intel agency or a domestic intel agency wouldn't want Jeffrey Epstein to be put in prison if he was providing them with such useful services. I wish that Pam Bondi, I've said this a million times and I'm going to keep saying it, I wish Pam Bondi would release that interview with Alex Acosta. I wish that congressional investigators would allow us to see the readout of the Alex Acosta interview, because I think it would be incredibly telling. Incredibly telling. But that report is just more substantiating evidence. All right, Pink1311F in the YouTube live chat says, why label Antifa as a terrorist group if they're not going to follow up and hold them accountable for their wrongdoings? Ask the White House that very good question. Listen, the White House is saying all the right things. We're on the same side. I like to be very generous with people who are on our side. They're the good guys. But we have to see actions that follow words. And what we need right now from President Trump is we need a word to instill confidence in us, that he's not just saying the words, but the actions are following, that it's not just a game of whack-a-mole, that the Department of Justice isn't just going to charge one or two individuals with kind of minor things after the violence has been committed. We need a word from President Trump to instill confidence in us that they are going to thoroughly dismantle these terrorist groups, these violent left-wing terrorist groups that threaten conservatives and Christians and Trump supporters in our very American way of life. We need to hear from the president. Every day that passes, my confidence in those very good words that he spoke in September, in Stephen Miller's very good words that he spoke in September, my confidence wanes. We need to see those actions, and we need to hear from the president that those actions are coming. Farouk says in the live chat, hey, Liz, my father was a veteran that served in the Korean War. Well, tell him that I said thank you for your service. I greatly appreciate your willingness to fight for our freedom and your courage in, just signing on that dotted line. There are so many veterans who are so humble. They'll be like, oh, all I did was pack pens. I just packed parachutes. I did nothing. I didn't do any of the dangerous stuff. Well, that may be true on a day-to-day basis, but every single person who serves in the United States military signed on that line a willingness to give his or her life to our country. And just the fact that you're willing to make that sacrifice if it's necessary, even if it's not likely, given the day-to-day job that you may have had in the military, thank you for that willingness to fight for our freedom. I do not take that for granted. Jeremy Christopher is responding to the video of the British World War II veteran, and he says, Britain is conquered. I fear you may be correct, Jeremy. And I say that not to be black-pilled, but as a warning call to us to make sure that that doesn't happen here. Because it's not just the globalists and the Islamists, the woke forces, the communists, the Antifa. They don't just have their eyes set on Britain. They have their eyes set on America too. If we do not prevent it from happening again, which just adds to the urgency of President Trump to dismantle these Antifa groups before they irreparably harm the United States of America and hurt more people the way that they did, the way that they assassinated Charlie Kirk. All right, guys, let me know in the live chat what you think of the Epstein report. I thought it was pretty significant. Substantiates a lot of what we're saying. Again, there's a lot of answers that we don't have, a lot of questions that still need to be asked. But in the absence of the classified information, we'll keep hunting. We'll keep digging, just like we have. We'll keep looking for the truth. And little by little, the truth is leaking. The truth is being uncovered. Day by day, we find out more. All right, guys, make sure you're subscribed to the show. If you're not already, go to youtube.com/Liz Wheeler, x.com/Liz_Wheeler on Spotify. We are The Liz Wheeler Show. If you would subscribe on Spotify, we have video on Spotify. It's an uncensored app. So anytime we have to tiptoe around terms of service on YouTube or Facebook, you can get the whole show on Spotify. if you are subscribed. And of course, on YouTube, those of you watching on YouTube, make sure that you click that notification bell so when we go live, you do not miss the first 5 minutes of the show. You're there for the whole ride. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for watching today. Thanks for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.